Good evening, and welcome to Otis Jiry's Creepypasta Crypt. In the mood for a tasty pasta to increase your adrenaline rush? Well, you've come to the right place. Pull up a chair, get some popcorn, put your feet up, and have a listen, if you dare.
Gather Round, Campers, by D.G. Collins. Narrated by Otis Jiry. There are two things that are magical in this world. The first one is fire. Without fire, where would we be? I'll tell you where. We'd be out here in the woods, in the cold and dark, and our lives would be much harder and shorter. But fire's just a chemical reaction, you say, because you're smart kids. And you'd be right. It's just chemistry. Just a chain reaction between heat and oxygen and some kind of fuel source. You can embellish it with big words like catalyst and oxidation if you want. If you want to look at fire that way, it's all science. So where does the magic come in? Well, I'll tell you. It needs one more element, another catalyst. The second magical thing in this world. Gather round, and I'll explain. That's right, pull up closer to the fire, and try not to burn your s'mores. Listen to the crickets, and the owls, and the coyotes, way off in the distance. Notice how they avoid your fire here? Animals are smart, too. They know not to mess with magic. See, I've tended to this campground for, about 100 years, as far as you're concerned. I've seen kids like you come and go, and then bring back their own kids. And those kids someday bring their kids, and on it goes, like the circle we're sitting in. Part of my job is to walk around, check on campers, and make sure everyone's safe and sound. I know my way through these trees like you know your mother's face. You could blindfold me, spin me all around, and I still wouldn't stumble or run into a single tree trunk or stump. And I'm quiet, like the Indians used to be. Like the breeze is when it's not blowing through the leaves or whispering in your ear. When I choose, my footsteps are only as loud as a single pine needle landing on the ground. I know what sound a tree makes when it falls, and no one's there to hear it. No, put your hand down. I'm not going to tell you. Now, being this quiet and having this job, I've heard just about every campfire story there is. Spooky tales and scary tales and creepy tales. Yes, all of them. People come here from all over the country and sometimes from all over the world. They sit here just like you, and they tell their tales to each other around a fire just like this one in this exact same spot. I've heard tales from scouts and scout leaders, from church groups and school groups. Whole extended families have sat around these campfires, trying to give each other the willies. There are old, withered storytellers and drunk teenagers, and young fellas trying to scare girls into their arms. Sometimes the stories are good, sometimes they're not. But I've heard them all, believe me. The funny thing is, no one knows where these stories come from exactly. There's almost never one person who can say, "Yeah, this is a scary campfire tale I personally made up." No. Their stories are always things they've heard from someone else, who also heard it from someone else, and so on. Strange, isn't it? Where do these stories start? Well, I won't tell you that, but I can tell you something else. Something that most campers never know. See, I walk through the campground at night, like I told you, And I see the campers at their fires, and I hear their tales. And then they all settle down and turn in. They bundle up together, getting all cozy under their blankets and sleeping bags. They zip up their tents, thinking they're safer that way. They fall asleep and dream about all the stories they heard. That's when the fire dies down after they're all asleep. It crackles and pops and hisses and flares. The logs slide apart. The coals get dim. And then it happens. The magic. You see, I told you that fires are magic when they're combined with one more element. And that element is the only other thing that's truly magical in this world. You know what it is? It's the stories themselves. Stories are magical. Tales, legends, fables, myths, whatever you want to call them. And even right here, once this fire burns down and you're all asleep, the ashes will stir. I've seen it with my own eyes. There in the middle, the embers will shift aside, and a hand will come out. Slowly, very slowly, the hand will move around, making the hole bigger. Not too big, but just big enough for someone to climb out. And do you know who climbs out? All of them. They all do. One by one, they'll pull themselves out of the hole. There'll be shadowy men, a man with a hook for a hand, then a ghost without a head, a woman covered in blood with empty eye sockets, a boy without a mouth, a thin man whose bones click when he walks, a greasy, dirty clown, something that looks like a wolf but moves like no wolf ever did, something else that looks part dead but all rotting. Then there'll be the man with no skin, and there's always the man with the axe. There are many more, of course. I've hidden over there and watched for half an hour while they all climbed out of the embers. And after each one lifts itself out, it runs off into the night until the last one kicks the ashes back over the hole. That's how the stories get around, you see, by coming true. They're almost as quiet as I am, and they slip silently through the trees and shamble out under the moonlight to spread their stories into the world. But not always. Now and then, one will stop. Maybe it'll be the axe man, or maybe the fellow with the hook. He'll go over to a tent or a sleeping bag and take a peek. And sometimes, now and then, he'll take more than a peek. Well, I've got to finish my rounds. Sleep tight, kids. I hope you enjoyed this evening's tasty pasta. Until next time, sleep tight and be afraid, very afraid.